Hello, and welcome to another episode of Untraditionally Traditional, a podcast with me, Brittany Duncan, a millennial homemaker. Join me each week as I share all the things I've learned that make keeping your home, garden, and life running smoothly, all while working. If you are enjoying the podcast, please be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcasting app so you get the episodes downloaded straight to you every Monday. Now, on to today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to Untraditionally Traditional, a millennial homemaker. This is your host, Brittany Duncan, and because I, like you, watch grocery prices and the money coming in and out of our bank account, I can tell you that affordability, in fact, is not a hoax. And today we're going to talk about some small ways to save money in your home. What we can make from scratch, what we can buy that stretches us further than other products, and how, as homemakers, we can keep a few more dollars in our pockets. Remember, small changes, $1 here, $1 there, at the end of the month really do add up, and after months, they add up a ton at the end of the year. But before we dive into today's topic, let me share my 3 favorite things of the week, which this week is going to focus on my 3 favorite kitchen tools that help me save money. First up, the Instant Pot. I always want to say Instapot, like Instagram, Instant Pot. My granny gave Johnson and I an Instant Pot. See, still doing it. For our wedding, right when they were coming out. And truthfully, Granny, if you're listening, I'm so sorry. But when I opened it, I didn't know what it was. And internally, when I figured it out, I was like, what am I going to do with a pressure cooker? And then I researched this magical device, and I have been using it multiple times a week ever since. Granny, you had your finger on the pulse of the latest cooking tech, and were way ahead of me, you genius lady, you. Love that thing. Second, food processor. Often one of the things that stops people from making things from scratch is the amount of work it takes, but there are tools that take that work and make it much, much easier. And one of those devices for me is the Cuisinart food processor. I would say if you're looking at one, definitely get at least an 8-cup because you want it to be able to hold all of the goodies that you are making. If you're shredding a bunch of cheese or vegetables or trying to chop something or mix something that's a large quantity, you want that bigger vessel to hold all that. Third, honestly, would be my Blackstone griddle, but I just talked about that on favorite things last week, so I'll pick another, and I'm going to go with some good knives. Our good friends, love y'all dearly, you know who you are, recently gifted Johnson and I some new kitchen knives because after many meals and cooking together in our kitchen, they just couldn't handle our dull knives anymore and thought we deserved better. And thank goodness for good friends who don't let friends use crappy knives. Our lives have changed, and I don't mean that in a joking manner. Trimming fat off of chicken, deboning meat seriously takes about 1/3 the amount of time it used to. And honestly, I didn't even think our knives were dull until we got these. I worked in a bakery and a cafe for a few months, and the biggest thing they cared about was kitchen safety. And so naturally, knife safety was at the forefront of that. And I remember on the first day, my boss showed me how to place a knife when not in use or between steps of cooking, horizontal at the top of your cutting board, sharp side of the blade facing away from you. And she very matter-of-factly said, if I ever catch your knife not in this position when it's not in use, you'll be let go immediately. And it made an impression on me. And to this day, that's how my knife sits on my own kitchen cutting board when I'm cooking, and it's in between steps most of the time. So, fun little fact there. Okay, let's dive into what you can actually make to save some moolah. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let me make my disclaimer here because it's important. A, I don't make these things 100% of the time. B, you are not less of a homemaker if you choose to buy these things instead of making them. You are simply choosing what's important for you in that moment, and sometimes time is the most important thing to us. So making homemade bread, which can be time-consuming, probably isn't going to best serve you what you really need. Sometimes we do need to save $1 though, or want to save $1, and we're willing to put in a little extra work to do it. That's what I'm saying here. Everything we do is a choice. We get to choose where we spend our time, our money, what ingredients we ingest. Sometimes making the item in question from scratch makes sense based on our needs, but other times it doesn't. So know that I'm not saying you should be making these things from scratch or buying what I'm talking about because it's the best. It's simply what I think are things that are easy enough to make and can save you some money. So if that is something that sounds appealing to you, great. If not, that's okay too. It does not make you any less of a homemaker. I think so often in the homemaking community, it's like all or nothing. If you say you make bread from scratch, you better make it from scratch 100% of the time. And if I see you that you bought, store-bought bread, all of a sudden you are a fraud. That is not the case. Everybody fluctuates in life based on the season and time and what is important to you in that particular moment. So when saving money is important for you, or you want, more of a hand of what is going into your body and you want to make it from scratch, these are some of those things. Okay, let's get into it. I'm going to start with a laundry list of carb and bread items because in my opinion, they're some of the easiest things to make from scratch versus store-bought, and the payoff in flavor and lack of crappy preservatives is huge. So first up is granola, which can be expensive to buy. It doesn't seem like it's that expensive, but when you really look at how much you're getting in the little bag and the ingredients it's comprised of, mainly rolled oats a lot of times, it's expensive for what it is. I use a base recipe out of a cookbook, but essentially it's 4 tablespoons of browned butter, half a cup of sweetener. I like to use honey, but maple syrup is good, or a combo of the two. Honestly, it's like kind of whatever I have on hand, but half a cup of that sweetener, 4 cups of rolled oats, and then I throw in 2 to 3 cups of mix-ins. It's very forgiving. It's kind of like a rough thing. I just made some the other day, and I used up pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, cashews, and hemp seeds that I had. Basically, when you mix everything in your bowl, you want the oats to be wet. So if you need more liquid, you can add either more sweetener, or typically what I do is I add some olive or avocado oil. Again, this recipe is very forgiving. Basically, you just want it to be wet enough. I mix in a little bit of salt, some cinnamon, and then I dump all that on a baking sheet. I spread it out and bake at 300 degrees for 15 minutes. Toss it and bake it for another 15 minutes or until things are golden brown. Again, depending on how wet the granola is kind of how long it takes, but typically it's about 30 minutes or so. Remove the pan, let it cool completely. At this point, I will add dried fruit, or my preference is freeze-dried fruit. A lot of recipes say to add your dried fruit before baking, and for me, I find that it turns those dried blueberries or whatever you have into little rocks, and I don't love that. So I add the dried fruit afterwards, or honestly, like I said, freeze-dried fruit is super good in it. Mix it up, store it in an airtight container, and you will have a bunch of granola for a low cost. Next up is bread. Now, sourdough is amazingly good, fairly expensive to buy, but having gone through the sourdoughs phase, like probably many of you listening, I will admit that my starter is in the back of the fridge, lonely, gray, and very, very neglected. I find sourdough to be a bit too much work to keep up with, honestly, but there are plenty of bread recipes that don't take the time that sourdough takes using activated yeast. I just made English muffins the other day, which are much more simple than you would think. I'll link a recipe that I used in the show notes. Top tip, if you have a Blackstone or a griddle, make them on this because you can cook more or even all of them at once, as opposed to using a cast iron where you can only fit 4 or so at a time. I made all 22 at once and it was so easy. So the recipe that I'm using is from Hostess at Heart. Again, it's going to be in the show notes. Just a note for these that instead of cane sugar, I used coconut sugar and they turned out great. So if you're trying to avoid some of those refined sugars, that is an option there for you too. Muffins are another really easy thing to make and they freeze really well. Nice thing about having these bread items in the freezer is that the night before you can just pull 2 out or however many you need, put them on a plate, cover them with a tea towel, and they're going to be ready and fresh in the morning. Or in a pinch, if you forgot to pull them out, just defrost them in the microwave. It's really so simple and you don't have to worry about your bread going moldy, or if it isn't going moldy, why it's not going moldy, what chemicals are in it from preventing it of doing that. So personally, flavor aside, I just like knowing what is in my food. And so if I can make my breads and that kind of thing, my muffins, my the other things we're going to talk about today, I like to. Pie crust can be expensive. And if you have a food processor, they're super, super simple to make. I use a recipe from Inspired Taste. Again, going to be linked in the show notes. It's 5 minutes of time, 4 ingredients, 5 if you want to add sugar. And the recipe is as simple as throwing the ingredients in, turning it on, and waiting for your dough ball to form, and voila. I like to make a few pie crust dough balls at once. The recipe will make 2. So if you were making a pie where you had a bottom and a top crust, it would make one pie. Or if you are, say, making like a quiche or a pecan pie where there's only the bottom crust, you'd get two of it out of it. Typically, I double the recipe, and then I have like 4 pie crusts. So and what I do with that is I won't roll out the pie crust. I will just freeze those dough balls. And then when I want a pie crust next time, I will take the dough ball out of the freezer, let it thaw, and then I roll it out and use it. And so it's just a really easy way to have pie dough from scratch on hand, and it tastes way better than the store-bought one. And again, you can control what you use. The one I use from this recipe inspired taste uses butter, but as opposed to like Crisco or vegetable shortening, or again, whatever the store ones are putting in it, which a lot of times isn't great. Next thing, and I warn you, if you make this from scratch, you'll never want store-bought again. What I'm referencing is tortillas, either corn or flour. Both are amazingly good when they're made from scratch. And I find most often that I make corn tortillas, and that's because they're easier and simpler to buy because I'm just buying the masa, which you can find in the bulk food section of stores, or this company Macienda sells it. That's who my tortilla press is through, and I love it. But you don't have to have like, it's a little expensive, and so you don't have to have like a super fancy tortilla press. Honestly, I have seen people just put the dough ball between 2 pieces of parchment and use like a rolling pin, that's the word, a rolling pin to roll it out, or even a wine bottle. So, use what you have on hand. When I use the masa, I add warm water and a little bit of olive oil, which I find makes pressing the tortillas easier and less sticky. Like they're less likely to stick to the parchment or whatever you're using to put that little dough ball in between. So flour tortillas are a little bit more involved, but again, not too bad. And as opposed to corn tortillas, which I will make for the meal in question, like I don't think that they taste as good if you make a bunch and keep them in the fridge. So usually the masa you can make, and then you can just press and do them in a pan as you go. But flour tortillas, on the other hand, you can make a bunch of and have them in the fridge or in the freezer. And so because it is a little bit more work, that's a nice thing to be able to do, is just making a big batch and putting it in the fridge. Or like I do with the pie crust, you can also do that with the flour tortilla dough, is freeze dough balls, which again makes it easier. So that's an option. The one that I will link for the flour tortillas is a recipe from Rick Martinez. I think it's the best one, especially top tip if you use bacon fat as the grease that's in it. Oh, so good. Last up on the carb side is using your Instant Pot to make grains. For a while, I was buying the pre-made and frozen rice from Trader Joe's that you just microwaved for a few minutes. And while it's convenient, it was coming in at a higher cost than making rice. And I don't love that you had to microwave it in a plastic bag, but I also don't like making rice in a pot. I don't like how it inevitably kind of like bubbles over and kind of makes a mess and you got to watch it. So I've been using the Instant Pot to make brown rice and wild rice and even quick rices like jasmine or basmati. It makes cleanup really simple, and unlike that pot on the stove, I don't have to watch it. So what I'm going to do, and I was thinking about this, when it comes time for our baby to get here, I'm going to make my own freezer rice bags that I can just dump the contents in a bowl. Like I'm going to pre-cook the rice. Then I can just take out a bag from the freezer, dump the contents in a bowl, cover it with a towel, and microwave. No plastic, but it's going to save me that time and money. So if you like the convenience of microwavable rice, that's something that you could do. If you have an Instant Pot, just make a bunch of it and then separate it out. Next category of things that are easy to make from home and to save money are sauces and stocks. Salad dressings especially, and my favorite part, you get to control what oil is used. For the people out there listening that like to avoid seed oils, this is really nice. It's as simple, honestly, folks, as throwing the ingredients in a mason jar, screwing the lid on, and shaking it up. It's so simple, and once you start doing it, it's like, oh gosh, why wasn't I doing this forever? For creamy dressings, you simply use an immersion blender or a regular blender or a food processor. So that is an option too. I tend to make oil and vinegar based dressings, and they keep in the fridge for a long time, which is really nice. Depending on what you're using as the cream base of your creamy dressings, you have to watch like how quickly those go bad. But the oil and vinegar ones, well, honestly, they probably last forever. They solidify because of the oil. And so what I do before I'm using it is I just microwave that jar for like 20 to 30 seconds, and then voila, you've got your salad dressing. Another one of my favorite things to make at home that I will never buy again is mayonnaise, specifically avocado mayonnaise because, well, seed oils. I'll link the recipe I use in the show notes. Again, so simple, especially if you have an immersion blender, which I highly recommend. I didn't have one for the longest time, and then I got it, and I use it all the time, not only for like mayonnaise and creamy salad dressings and things like that, but also soups and that kind of thing. It's like really nice to be able to blend it in the pot and not have to deal with like transferring it to the blender and it's spilling and it's making a mess. An immersion blender is relatively inexpensive, and once you have it, I think you'll find like all sorts of things you can use it for. But especially helpful for making mayonnaise. All you do is put the ingredients in a jar, blend until it's creamy, and voila. I also like that you can make smaller amounts too, because mayonnaise having raw eggs in it, it doesn't keep for very long. Like max 2 weeks. We also don't eat a ton of mayonnaise, so I hate having a bunch in there. And then you should question what is in store-bought mayo that makes it last for 6 months. Hint, it's often a chemical preservative called EDTA, which is commonly found in salad dressings, which we just talked about, mayonnaise, and sandwich spreads. Speaking of sandwich spreads, next on my list is nut butters, which, if you have a food processor, could not be easier to make and require one ingredient, the nut of your choice. We usually make peanut butter and almond butter, but I've also made sunflower butter and cashew butter before. All you need is dry roasted nuts. Personally, what I do, I buy my nuts from Costco and then I throw them on a baking sheet in the oven for like 10 minutes at 350, let them cool mostly, and then I toss them in the food processor. And all you do is blend it until it is a nut butter consistency. Eventually, it will turn into liquid. It's pretty crazy. So incredibly simple. If you want to add salt, vanilla, cinnamon, whatever you want to, you can. And it gives you total control over what is in it. You're not adding oil to it. Next up, not a sauce, but a stock. I love homemade stock for a few reasons. Flavor, nutrition, and that it limits waste. I found the easiest way to make stock is to have 2-gallon Ziploc bags in your freezer. One for chicken bones or whatever bones you want to use, and another for veggie scraps. When my bags are full, I simply dump them into a big stock pot, add 14 cups of water, some salt, and boil for at least an hour or two. Strain it, let it cool, and then I like to freeze it in these 2-cup containers that I get on Amazon. I'll link those in the show notes. I've talked about them before. It's like if I make a big batch of gumbo or red beans or picadillo or whatever I make, that's what I freeze them in, is these 2-cup containers. I used to make a whole chicken like every week or two, and so I always had all these chicken bones, and I need to go back to that, one, because I got so many meals out of the bird, but 2, I had all those beautiful bones for stock. And so this is something that I would like to implement more, is getting back to roasting chicken and then making stock from scratch. In terms of the veggie scraps, think of it like your onion peels, your celery, your herb stems, your carrots. You can get outside of it too. Personally, like I don't really like lemon rinds in my stock, but like I've seen people do that. Little bits of like the Parmesan rind, throw them in there. I know that's not a veggie, but it does add great flavor. It's pretty forgiving depending what you put in that bag, but at least those things, like your common veggies that you put in stock, you can do all those. So that's really, really easy. Okay, our last section is snacks, starting with homemade yogurt. If you have that Instant Pot, notice a theme here. So once you get that thing, you start using it all the time. You can make yogurt or Greek yogurt in it. It's been a little bit since I've done this myself, but as I was thinking about all the different things that I can make in the Instant Pot, I used to do it all the time, and I want to go back to it because it's as inexpensive as having some leftover yogurt or buying a small single serving thing of plain Greek yogurt and a gallon of milk. I use the recipe in the Instant Pot cookbook, but I've linked one in the show notes that looks very similar. And if you want to make Greek yogurt, to do that, you strain out the whey from the yogurt. And to some recipes will say like to use what do they call that? Cheesecloth. But I use a nut milk bag to strain it, and it makes it so much easier. Cleanup is simple. And that liquid that you drain out the whey, you can save that and use it in smoothies for an added nutritional boost. So again, I'm always thinking like, what can we save that comes from it? So scraps, use them for stock. The whey, put it in your smoothies. Next on my snack list is a drink, and that is homemade hot chocolate. So stinking simple. Literally milk, cocoa powder, and a bit of maple syrup. I personally mix all this in our milk frother that also heats up the milk, but you can easily do it in a pot with a whisk. I've done it many times when traveling, and that's works just as well. I have several of these a week, and personally, I always add the Vital Collagen Protein Powder unflavored to it for an added 20 grams of protein. But I love that with this, you can control the sweetness level, and you're using maple syrup instead of refined sugar. So for those of you with kids out there who want hot chocolate, but you're not trying to like jack them up with a bunch of sugar, this would be a really easy way to do that. Next on my snack list is hummus. Again, just a few ingredients and either a food processor or a blender. And you've got hummus for much less. I think the Ina Garten recipe is a really good starting point, so I've got that one linked in the show notes. And once you're comfortable with it, you can use that as a base and then play with mix-ins and flavor profiles. Basically, you're combining canned chickpeas, tahini, oil, and an acid, usually lemon juice, and then salt and whatever kind of seasoning you want. So the one that is linked is just like a simple garlic lemon hummus, kind of plain hummus, similar to what you would get in the store. But I have added sriracha to it to make like a spicy hummus, or sun-dried tomatoes, or balsamic, or, there's all sorts of things you can do. So I use that as my base typically. Last but not least on the snack front is popcorn, because I am a popcorn nut. I love it. And it's, again, 2 ingredients, popcorn kernels and oil. I like to use avocado oil because it has a higher smoke point and it's not a seed oil. But you simply add the oil to the pot, heat it up, add the kernels, put a lid on it, and eventually they'll start to pop. And then you keep the popcorn moving by shaking the pot. And when the pops stop, pops, that's a mouthful. You remove the pot from the heat and put your popcorn in a bowl, and then you can add your seasonings of choice, and boom, you've got homemade healthy popcorn. My parents gave Johnson and I this awesome pot that we now use that has like a hand crank to keep the kernels moving, from a company called Popsmith, and that's an option too. And honestly, their mixes that they sell are really great. They use coconut oil, and the seasoning that they use is like pretty clean. And so that is fun if you want like that traditional buttered popcorn flavor of the movie theaters. I was actually like shocked how much it tasted like movie theater popcorn for how the ingredients were pretty clean, but that pot makes it really easy. But you don't have to have a special pot for it. You can, again, for the longest time, I just used a like smaller soup pot with a lid, olive oil, and the kernels. Switched to avocado oil once I started on that train. So simple. So highly recommend that. Especially if you look up what is in microwavable popcorn. Not good. So this is a much healthier way to do it. So that's a list of many things that you can make from scratch. But once you start, there's so many, and you can expand what you make. Or like I said at the top of the episode, the things that you make from scratch will come and go in seasons. Having freezer space is really great because you can make big batches of things, and then you can put the effort in once in a while and have it carry you through several months or batches of whatever you're making. But I hope this episode inspires you to dip into thinking about what you can make from scratch if saving money is on your list of would like to do's for 2026. I was going to talk about products, but I think I will save that for another episode in terms of products we use in the house that save us some money. So yeah, for the sake of time, I'm going to put a pin in that one for now, and we'll just stick to food for now. But until next week, happy homemaking, everybody. P.S. This is episode 100, if you can believe it. I can't. To help me celebrate, please share the podcast with somebody you know. If you haven't, I would love if you would write a review. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you back here next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Untraditionally Traditional. If you enjoy the podcast, please share it with those special people who would love it too, and write a review. For more tips and photos of my home and garden, follow Untraditionally Traditional Pod on Instagram. Until next week, let's continue to make our homes places of joy and service to ourselves and those we share them with.